Hello, my friend. It's Gina. Thank you for continuing the long journey in the effort to find justice for Elizabeth. This is an account that's based on a true story, one that, as of this recording, remains ongoing. Welcome back to Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman, Episode 14. Content warning. This and future episodes contain sensitive topics and may cause distress to some listeners. Hearing disturbing actions of oppression, manipulation, and abuse can bring up painful memories, personal struggles, and trauma for many. Narrators note, the names have been changed and places are purposefully arbitrary to protect the privacy of those involved. This podcast is our way of telling Catherine and Elizabeth's story so that others can be aware of potential future issues. The central figures in our story include Catherine, her sister Elizabeth, Elizabeth's husband Walter, and Walter's granddaughter Darcy. Additional figures: Elizabeth's elder brother and current guardian, Charles, the attorney who represents Elizabeth's family, Alex, and Sam, the assistant county attorney. Quick recap of episode 13. Even though it's fantastic that there's an FBI agent assigned to Elizabeth's case, it may be a while until there's an update from them. In the meantime, the agent advised Catherine that she and the family should press the local authorities to charge Darcy with any and all misdemeanors they have, regardless how minor they may seem. Any charges establish the base of crimes to be charged to come. We discuss some of the underlying issues of the difficulties of charging an individual with a crime, both those who have access to money as well as the have-nots. Also, we are making a plea that if any one of our listeners happens to know someone who might know someone with media contacts, to please share this podcast, this story, taking the FBI agent's advice to try to emphasize the importance of public attention to this type of crime. Also, if someone in the media might be convinced to take an interest in this particular case as well. Now, let's continue our story. The word abuse is defined as this: to use something for a bad effect, for a bad purpose, or to treat a person or animal with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. The word includes a broad spectrum of harms. When this question is asked of an abuse survivor, why do people stay in abusive relationships? It implies that the victim is to blame for allowing the abuse in the first place. Why isn't it always posed like this instead? Why do people abuse the person they claim to love? So, why don't they just leave? Because leaving can be dangerous. Existing in a toxic relationship can be extremely unsafe for a victim. The fear is real that the violence will get worse, even lethal. Abusers may have threatened to seriously hurt, even kill the abused partner, their pets, children, or other family members. Fear of being stalked, which is the current term for what I consider to be the real word, which is hunted. At home, the place of work, school, on the street, at a friend's or a family member's home. Abuse tends to begin with isolation. The partner's friends and family may not even be aware of the abuse, or may not support their leaving, or the victim has no one to turn to because the isolation is the key dynamic of intimate partner violence. Abuse is usually imperceptible. at first, just a gradual shift in behavior. There's a metaphor that describes how abuse happens quite well. If you put a frog in a pot of water, then ever so slowly, increasing the heat, maybe a degree or two at a time, the frog doesn't notice the difference in temperature because it adapts to the long, slow change until it's too late and it is eventually boiled to death. Lack of resources can be enough to keep many abused persons in the home. And I use the word home loosely because what it actually is an abode or a dwelling, not what most would want to call home. Many victims are in low-paying jobs or not working at all. No source of income due to financial abuse or access to alternative housing, cash, or credit. Lack of resources wasn't one of Elizabeth's key concerns, but Walter had convinced her that if she were to divorce him, he would fight her tooth and nail and that he would take everything she earned for the rest of their lives because she owed him that and more. Wait, hold on. Are you really still thinking that as smart as she was, why did she believe him? One more time for those who have never been on the receiving end of mental and emotional abuse. Over the course of all of those years, every single threat, the gaslighting Walter did, all came true. So why wouldn't she believe? She would lose everything she'd worked so hard for her entire life. Believe me, she believed him. Most abusive partners exhibit a behavioral pattern that's described as a cycle of violence. Now, this cycle has 3 phases. The honeymoon phase, where everything seems lovely, wonderful, in fact. The tension-building phase. The long-term victims often know what's coming. They've seen it before, and they hope they can brace for the impact, which is inevitably followed by the explosion. And sadly, the cycle just repeats itself over and over and over. Many abusers are remorseful after the storm passes, promising they'll change, sometimes adding the "it'll never happen again." As long as the victim acquiesces and accepts the apology, which sometimes includes an agreement from the victim to apologize to their abuser as if the incident was their fault. Sometimes the abuser may not reoffend for a while, or not. The more often the cycle begins again, the more likely the victim will threaten to leave. When Walter introduced himself to Elizabeth at college, he was several years her senior, fresh out of the military, and don't forget, Elizabeth had never, and I can't stress this enough, never, ever had a date, hence no boyfriend, let alone a man. After many discussions with the family, there is no doubt in my mind that Elizabeth was swept off her feet. It was quick and thorough. Our brain is open to love, and it colors our vision. The adage, rose-colored glasses, comes to mind. Instead of taking it slow, building a stable relationship, Elizabeth was overwhelmed by Walter's attentions. People who abuse others are often calculating. They work methodically, one step at a time, to disassociate the target from the people around them the most, and eventually even from your own self. Many times it takes years, but the goal is to mold their target into something that meets their every need. victims become used to the abuse. Quite literally, the trauma becomes their new normal. And choosing to disrupt the new normal, even if it is abusive, is a radical shift to the brain, and there is this natural resistance that takes place. This is exactly how it happened for Elizabeth. Walter drove a wedge between himself and Elizabeth's family from the very beginning. Don't forget, they met in the early 1970s. So you might think that the 60s and 70s were the decades of free love. But in many, many parts of this country, especially where church is the most powerful entity, there were no flower child movements. Instead, sex and living together outside of marriage was as frowned upon as divorce. Of course, Elizabeth had no real-life understanding of what was happening. She was lucky, to an extent, to have only seen kind and loving marriages in her young life. She just wanted to be with this man, the one who professed to love her more than life itself. So to protect her marriage, she made the choice to go along to get along, whether it was conscious or subconscious. It just was. According to the Virginia Physicians for Women, the main reason women don't leave is fear. Fear that they have nowhere to go and no one to turn to for help and resources. Often their partner has isolated them from their friends and family who they would normally look to for support. Sometimes abusive partners interfere with a woman's job, limiting her ability to make a living or even convincing or forcing her to quit. This makes the woman feel financially dependent on the abuser and trapped in the relationship. Women are often fearful of the effects that leaving would have on their children, abruptly taking them out of school, removing them from financial stability, etc. They also don't want to face the difficult questions their children might ask. The signs of domestic abuse can be difficult to recognize by family and friends when the victim is trying her hardest to appear fine. Sometimes even the victim herself might not recognize abusive behavior in her own relationship. She may not even know what a healthy relationship looks like and might assume that abusive behavior is just part of a normal relationship. You know, all couples fight, especially if she was raised in the same type of unhealthy environment. In fact, abusive behavior can seem very loving, especially at first. But that love is often controlling behavior meant to manipulate or isolate a victim. Walter's behavior wasn't acceptable to Elizabeth's parents or her siblings, but they would do whatever they could to protect her. If Elizabeth was so damn determined to stay with Walter, the family would try to not interfere. They quickly learned that when anyone in the family commented on Walter's conduct or exploits, Elizabeth would bear the brunt of his retribution. There was no doubt that Walter was dangerous, but no matter how much pleading and cajoling Elizabeth, she just wouldn't budge. Through the years, the control Walter had over Elizabeth was palatable. They could feel the stress and anxiety from Elizabeth on phone calls, even though she tried her best to hide it. Visits to the couple were even more painful. We may never know the extent of abuse Elizabeth lived with. She rarely talked about it with anyone that we know of, even her closest confidant, Catherine. Through the years, Catherine witnessed many outbursts and violent incidents aimed at Elizabeth, as well as herself. We can only assume that even worse events happened behind closed doors, as so many can attest. You know, we always end this podcast with this statement: abuse in all forms is an equal opportunity instrument of control, regardless of age, gender, IQ, education, or socioeconomic status. Don't believe those words? Okay. How about a few statistics? According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, an average of 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States. That's over 12 million women and men over the course of a single year. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men in the U.S. have experienced rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Almost half of all women and men in the U.S. have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Survivors are 3 times as likely to meet the criteria for PTSD and are 3 times more likely to develop a major depressive order. A comprehensive review article found the prevalence of elder abuse to be approximately 10%, including physical abuse, psychological or verbal abuse, sexual abuse, financial exploitation, and neglect. Clergy and secular counselors are often trained to see only the goal of saving the marriage at all cost, instead of a goal of recognizing and stopping the abuse. Some believe that leaving a partner, even an abusive partner, is disgraceful and reprehensible. Some survivors may not even believe divorce is a viable alternative. Some survivors are socialized to believe that they are solely responsible for making their marriage work or for keeping the family together. Police officers don't consistently provide support to survivors. They may treat violence as a domestic dispute instead of a crime, where one person is attacking another person. And getting a restraining order? Do you really think a piece of paper is going to stop an abusive partner from returning and repeating the assault? Many times the retaliation is so much worse because the victim tried to seek help. Like, that'll show her. Remember, leaving is a process. Survivors may leave and return several times before permanently separating from their abusive partner. In fact, research shows that it can take up to 7 attempts before a survivor permanently leaves. We know that Elizabeth left Walter at least 3 times. Once for over a year. She had a new life. She was happy for the first time as an adult until he found her and eventually manipulated her to come back. The Domestic Violence Hotline offers 24/7 support, information, and advocacy for people in abusive relationships. Relationship abuse is ugly, and especially when it comes from the people we love, people we trust. The more informed we keep ourselves and others, the more prepared we'll be to recognize and stop abuse when it happens. So I hope you join us soon for episode 15, Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman. Protect yourself and those you love. It's worth repeating, abuse in all forms is an equal opportunity instrument of control, regardless of age, gender, IQ, education, or socioeconomic status. Whatever your age, for your own sake and for those who care about you, please establish a living will. Keep it somewhere your chosen caretakers can access it. And if you don't have your assets in order, please make plans right now to do so. Talk to an attorney and or an investment institution you trust and make it happen before it's too late. The terms elder abuse, elder neglect, and elder fraud are relatively new. In general, elder abuse is a term referring to any knowing, intentional, or neglectful act by a caretaker or any other person that causes harm or a serious risk of harm to a vulnerable elderly person. Legislators in all 50 states have passed some form of elder abuse prevention laws. A good place to start for more information is the website justice.gov/elderjustice. And if you suspect elder abuse, there is help. The National Elder Fraud Hotline is 1-833-FRAUD-11. That's 833-372-8311. A fantastic resource is the National Center on Elder Abuse. Their website is ncea.acl.gov. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233. To report identity theft, contact the Federal Trade Commission at identitytheft.gov or call 1-877-438-4338. These links and phone numbers are also located on the Lost Sister webpage, lostsister.buzzsprout.com. Also, please follow our Facebook page, Lost Sister, a Discarded Woman podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, follow, and share with your friends and family. By gaining a wider audience, we hope to bring attention to not only Elizabeth and Catherine's story, but to shine an enormous light on all domestic abuse, elder abuse, domestic violence, and elder fraud. More must be done to protect the vulnerable in our society. Our hope is by sharing Elizabeth and Catherine's story that it might help others to avoid the same happening to them or someone they love. Thank you.